Howdy, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the AggieCentral podcast as we continue to cover Miami and Indiana, two juggernaut of teams, one of which is going to be the national championship come this time next week. Okay. I want to first off say thank you for all your kind support in the comments, the likes, everything. I've felt so blessed by everything that you have done to support me to this point. I hope the clips last video blessed you as well. I hope they gave you a solid early look at what both teams are going to be bringing to the table. Okay. Tonight, we're going to take a different perspective on things. So it's important for me to start off this by actually telling you that I have a few things I need to lay on the table. Okay. Two main things I want to point out. One, I'm wearing the hat for a reason. Okay. Miami fans, they understand. They've been with me for a little bit longer. Indiana, I do have a small dog in this hunt, okay? So I want to be upfront about that. If Miami wins, it makes my team look slightly better. What I can guarantee, though, what I'm not going to do, I'm not going to say Miami wins, therefore that means Texas A&M is basically the second best team because they played them really, really close, or however it kind of equates out to. Not going to do that, okay? But I wanted you to know, of course, it does make my team look slightly better if Miami does better, okay? But second, last episode I showed you about 8 to 10 clips, 8 to 10 plays of each team, okay? One single game is about 120 plays, okay? So I barely showed you anything. I could have selected those plays to steer you in a particular direction or not. I may have an agenda, okay? I just want to put that out there because I want you now to start second guessing whether or not I'm actually giving you good stuff, okay? Because tonight's episode helps to speak to that piece because tonight we're going to look at it by the numbers, okay? The numbers will help contextualize everything that you've seen and give you a completely different perspective. That way you can kind of confirm or deny, hey, some of the things that I've seen over there. I want you to do that. So whether you can, that way you can gauge if those things shown were fairly accurate. This is going to work all together in the end to give you a good picture of who's going to come out ahead in this game. How are they both going to perform? Okay, that's the goal. That's the goal. Give you an idea. If I've done my job, it's to give you a good perspective of what each team's going to do. So let's go ahead and jump straight into the numbers, okay? Full disclosure though, I picked 6 categories to show you. There's many categories I could show you. So these are what I hold to be most important, okay? You do not have to subscribe to those, and you can definitely take on some others. But let me cover these. The idea, again, is to give you a general view, and then I've got some specific that really resonate with me, okay? So, for instance, looking at both their offenses. Hurricanes, 409 yards per game. Hoosiers, doing a tick better, 461, right? Points per game. Hoosiers are averaging 42 points per game. Hurricanes, 31. First downs per game, 22.2 for Miami, 24 for Indiana. Now, jump down to red zone real quick. What that means is that Miami is scoring 88.7% of the time, and 68% of the time those are touchdowns. Okay, so that gives you a nice little comparison what Indiana is doing relative. 91% of the time, Indiana is scoring points, and 74% of the time those are touchdowns, right? Indiana's doing a slight bit better on third down conversions as well from an offensive standpoint. However, they are giving up just a little bit more tackles, a few more tackles for loss per game. Now, anytime we go through this kind of stuff, though, and this is where I want you to start questioning a few things again, too, is to say, sure, they put up these numbers. Sure, they did this. Sure, they did that. But who did they do it against? Okay? Who did they do it against? Did they do it against a high school team? G5 team? Did they do it against the gauntlet? Those questions are inevitable to come up. They're natural and it's completely fine. Let's do a good job of making sure we contextualize those things in the right way, okay? Take a look at this. Here's their last opponent, and here's what their last opponent did on defense. So thinking about those offenses that you just see, what they did, here's the defense that they did it against, okay? Now, I shy away from rankings at this point because I think when you get into the playoff situation, all the games prior to don't really make so much sense as it does some of the production, okay? Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss is an SEC team, right? So naturally, they've been through the gauntlet, right? So that gives them a little bit more street cred, right? Now, this is to kind of understand that I get it. Ole Miss is part of the SEC. The SEC has gone like 1-8 in the bowl games this year. So I am not going to subscribe to this gauntlet mindset at this point. A&M's in the SEC too. Do I think A&M played Miami really tough? Yes, I do. Am I going to tell you that was tougher than Oregon or Alabama played them? Because Indiana beat Alabama as well. Don't they get credit for that? Absolutely. But not SEC credit. Not for beating an SEC team. If SEC's not that good, let's not even bring that in there. Let's just say, hey, they beat a playoff caliber team. They beat a good team. And let's leave it at that. Let's give this an even viewpoint across for both teams, okay? So this is what they did against Ole Miss and against Oregon, okay? Oregon's holding opponents to 4,100 yards per game. Ole Miss giving up 1,100 yards more, not per game. This is for the entire season. That's 4,100 yards for the entire season. Ole Miss has given up 1,100 yards more over the course of the season, right? Turnovers. Ole Miss has gotten 15. They've given up 14. And that's how you read the numbers. Oregon has gotten 21, but they have given up 15, okay? Tackles for loss. Each one of those is generating. Ole Miss generates 5.5 tackles per loss per game. Oregon 4.9. You can kind of get a pretty good sense here that, like, yards per game, Oregon 273 and Ole Miss 348. Oregon's a little bit stingier on defense by the numbers, okay? Points per game, 17.9 for Oregon, 21.1 for Ole Miss. Oregon's definitely showing to be stingier on defense, okay? Swing back over to these offenses. I want to give you a couple of things to kind of consider here, okay? Miami, this is something I find to be really important. Long plays from scrimmage, Miami ranks 9th, okay? But the numbers to go along with that are these. They have generated 220 plays of 10 plus yards, 50 plays of 20 plus yards. Now, Indiana is 3rd in the nation in this category, 234 plays of 10 plus yards, 88 of 20 plus yards, okay? So based off of these numbers, the probably the natural take would be to say Indiana is showing to be more explosive on offense. Okay, next, you'll hear from a lot of national media, they'll talk about efficiency numbers. I don't want to just talk about efficiency numbers. I want to tell you what my efficiency numbers look like, give you an idea as I work you through these, okay? I like to look at it by possessions and by first downs, okay? So roll with me here for a second, okay? Let's talk about what Indiana did against Oregon, okay? Indiana had 10 possessions against Oregon. 7 of those possessions got them points. 7 of those possessions were also touchdowns. So you could basically say that Indiana is 70% efficient at this point. And the multiplier is that these are a lot of times touchdowns. In this case, 100% of the times that they scored, it was touchdowns. Okay, swing back over. Let's look at what Miami did versus Ohio State. Actually, we'll start off with Ole Miss. So what they did against Ole Miss, they had 10 possessions. 5 of those were for points. So 50% of the time they scored. 40% of that were touchdowns. Okay? So just thinking about those efficiency numbers, and I'll run you through the rest of the teams real quick and see if it changed. One of the things to kind of note as we go through this is that Ole Miss, now, see, I wouldn't tell you that they went through a gauntlet, the teams that they played. You're talking about Ole Miss, you're talking about A&M, right? What I would say only is this. At this point, Miami has had to play 3 high-quality teams, okay? The bye, I think, is very beneficial for Indiana. I think there, to a degree, Miami was in their 3rd game that they were going to have to get up for, big time get up for, right? It's hard to do week after week after week, okay? So I think there's some level of that did take a toll on them. There's some rumor of some sickness. I believe this has been fully confirmed, though, that was running throughout the team. And you can't just expect to always play your complete A game. And this is why I think that as you play higher quality teams, and when you don't play your A game, it rears its head. It really does. Okay. Let's look at it by first downs. Okay. Let's look at it by first downs. Let's start with Indiana. Okay. So last game, Indiana had 18 first downs versus Oregon, right? 18 first downs. That equated to 3.1 points per first down, okay? Meaning that every first down was worth just over 3 points for Indiana versus Oregon, okay? Now, I did not pull out some of the points that were scored defensively, okay? But the number still speaks for itself. Listen to Miami's numbers, okay, versus Ole Miss. Let's see. Ole Miss, 28 first downs. 28 first downs for Miami versus Ole Miss. That equated to 1.1 points per first down, right? Because they scored 31 points. They got 28 first downs. That means every time they got a first down, it essentially got them 1.1 points. So it's 1.1 to 3.1 for Indiana. It's quite a difference in efficiency, right? Quite a difference in efficiency. And those numbers pretty much held out throughout the remainder of the games. You look at Miami playing A&M. You look at the beating that Indiana gave to Bama, and it actually ends up kind of getting worse there. Just some of the things that Indiana has done to some of these teams has been just outright slaughter almost. So, but rest assured, Miami, aside from the A&M game, it tends to be just about the same. They did slightly better against Ohio State. Against Ohio State, Miami was getting 1.3 points per first down. 1.3. It dropped below 1 against A&M, but that's in that particular game. Win was real bad. There's some other contextual things going on, I think, with that, but the win was the main one. It was not an offense rich environment for that particular game based off that, okay? Now, let's look at defenses. Miami, they're giving up 292 yards per game. Hoosiers, 260. Points per game, both are pretty stingy. 14 points for Miami, 11.1 for Indiana. First downs per game, 13.1 given up for the Hoosiers, 16.9. Third down conversion, almost identical, only giving up about 30% to their opponents. Red zone, every time their opponent gets in the red zone, Indiana slightly worse in this category, giving up 80% of the time opponents are getting points. 35% are touchdowns. So Miami's being stingier with the points being scored, but has a higher percentage given up of touchdowns. This probably at minimum equals out if you're just trying to give it a little bit of weight. Tackles for loss. Hoosiers are actually generating more, which I found to be just a little bit surprising. I thought Miami was probably generating more than Indiana. So again, who were they up against, right? Who were they up against? Here's the offenses. Going back to that. Ole Miss, 489 yards per game. Oregon, 452. So you could probably say somewhat right off the bat that Miami defense probably going up just slightly more aggressive offense in Ole Miss, right? But you see the points per game were exactly the same in what they're doing on offense. Both scoring 36.9 for both teams. Yards per play, pretty even, 6.7 to 6.9. Tackles for loss allowed by each one of them, slightly more by Ole Miss, about a half TFL more allowed. Turnovers, again, almost relatively exactly the same as before. And they should be because they kind of go both ways, right? Your team only gets credit for those. So not to emphasize that. Ole Miss putting up a lot of yards, 7,300. In Oregon, the same, 6,700 yards being put up. So let me give you the same numbers very similarly, okay? Because this helps contextualize exactly what each one of these teams is going through. So let's start with the Indiana defense. Indiana defense last played Oregon, right? Oregon scored 22 points, um, and they did this on 21st downs, right? 21st downs. So how many points was that per first down? Just over one, right? Just over 1 point per first down. Let's try it by possessions. Indiana. Indiana allowed Oregon to have 12 possessions. Well, not allowed. That's just how the game went. But they allowed them to score on 3 of those. So 25% of the time, Oregon scored, right? Now, 25% of those were TDs as well. So that gives you an idea of how efficient the Indiana defense was playing Oregon, right? Ole Miss. Let's switch over to Ole Miss. That was the last time that Miami played, right? That's the last game. Miami. Ole Miss had 11 possessions against Miami. 6 of those resulted in points. That's 55%. 18% of that were touchdowns. Okay? So, pretty stingy themselves. Let's look at it by first downs. Ole Miss had 27 points. They did that on 23 first downs. That's 1.2 points for every first down that they get. Okay? And again, it really kind of plays out pretty similarly, except for the A&M. A&M is an anomaly. I would say Alabama is also an anomaly. The points scored allowed were so low that you kind of get down into like this like zero point 0.2 points per first down situation. And I think that's just too far out of the norm to kind of like make real good heads or tails of that. And of course, that's all Indiana's got to go off at this point. Now, Miami did play Ohio State. They allowed them to play score 14 points. They did that on 18 first downs, and it's about 0.75 points, 3/4 of a point per first down, which is really good. Ohio State had 10 possessions. They scored on 2 of those. 20% of the time they had touchdowns. So 20% scored, and both of those were touchdowns. Hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea of what both of these offenses and defenses can do by the numbers. If I've given you an honest take, put in the comments what you think you've seen so far. It's best if you do that before I tell you what I'm about to tell you. Okay? So one quick pause there. And now, based off of what I've seen, I would give the edge at this point to Indiana. Okay? If I was going to try and contextualize this just a slight bit more, I might bring in strength of schedule, strength of record, right? You want to try and even these things out. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges. And the big old debate is, which conference is better, this and that, right? I've been through all that. Pretty seasoned, as a matter of fact, I would say, because I've had to either defend the SEC or actually just face up to the music, right? They went 1-8 in bowl season. All right. Indiana, their strength of record is number 1 in the country, right? Strength of record. Strength of schedule, however, is 15th. You do just a quick average, 1 plus 15 is 16. We don't have to actually average it and just do the total, because if you're going to divide by 2, you just get 8, and that's fine. Get you the same number, makes the same point. Miami strength of record is 3, right? Now, strength of record is basically a number that says what other teams, the percentage, this is based off of ranking, how they would perform, the chances of them having the same record as you, okay? Miami's 3rd in the nation. For strength of schedule, they're 12th. Okay, so 3 plus 12 makes the 15. Okay, they're slightly better. Slightly better. Is it enough to make a big sweeping opinion on it? Probably not. I wouldn't do that. Now, if you want to look at something different, Ole Miss, their strength of record 6 and strength of schedule is 31 versus Oregon's is 2 and 6. That's maybe a substantial difference to note. So maybe those numbers that you saw for Oregon, maybe they are a little stronger than they did edge out, I would say, Ole Miss in quite a few categories, probably more so than Ole Miss did, especially from a defensive standpoint. So based off the idea that Ole Miss played probably slightly worse, is that the right word? Not slightly, not as good competition. You give a little bit more weight to Oregon in this case, right? Perhaps, perhaps. Um, Indiana and Miami's numbers directly, though, are pretty comparable. This is pretty even. I would only probably say that Indiana's got the edge based off the numbers. If I were going to make a strong case for Indiana, I would say, well, they didn't beat out Miami in these categories by much. However, there were maybe many categories that they did have the edge on. Maybe that consistency weighs out a lot more. Okay. In the end, you kind of got to make a faith-based judgment on this, on how you're going to lend the weight to some of these and how you're going to mix it around and move it over there. Do I can't care about this? Do I care about that? And how are you going to do that? I don't know what the right answer is, full disclosure. I just want you to see that, um, have a based take on what you see so you can couple that with the video that you've seen to come away with a conclusion or some ideas about these two teams. All I know is this: the only thing I'm ever going to be real confident in is that these are two damn good teams. They are really good, both of them. And I know that the whole purpose of this is that they know they're going up against two amazing teams, and so they're likely to, if they were gonna elevate their game, this is the game they would do it. It's the beauty of competition. I'm going to go play what's the number one team in the country. I better bring my A game. And this is how we get better. Okay. This is why I love ball so much. This is why I love competition like this so much. So, hats off to both these teams. Already, we haven't even got there yet. We got to get a few more episodes in. So, if you've got some ideas, some things that you also want to hear spoken about, put it in the comments. Let me know, and I'm happy to cover that. Until we get to the next one, y'all, peace.